So people try to talk about the political parties having switched policies. That the Republicans used to be, more logical and less racist and sexist. Now that's just obviously not true. Okay, so I'll tell you what happened. Um, the Democratic Party historically has lacked logic and integrity. Okay, they come from places of high rates of crime. Now the Republicans fought against this stuff. They established rights for uh, minorities and women. Okay, and the Democrats used to dominate the South. Well, the South just conceded. Okay, the South obviously just had a change of heart. Um, I've been in the South, and I know what it's like there. So when they talk about change of ideology, they usually try to talk about, you know, the Republicans are now the racist and sexist party. Okay, that's just not true. It's actually the Democrats that remain racist and sexist. It's just they gave up on, trying to be racist and sexist towards minorities and women to being racist and sexist towards white men. So the Democratic Party, just this party that has lacked integrity, okay, they started to get dominated by the Republican Party. Their racist platform was no longer working. The racism towards the minorities and sexism towards the women was no longer working. The last time that they won the South was in 1976. Segregation was outlawed, but it was still happening. Jimmy Carter was the president that was elected in 1976. And he is a person that has been outspoken about supporting the modern Democratic Party. So the last Democratic president to dominate the South supports the modern Democratic Party. Okay? Well, he did. He's dead now. So yeah, it's really obvious what happened. It's just the Republican Party, being the logical party historically, they realized that this affirmative action stuff, this DEI stuff, was becoming racist and sexist towards white men. So they just began to protect them because the women and the minorities no longer needed protection. They had their freedoms. They were actually beginning to be hostile, towards this other group. So they talk about this switch of ideologies of, the protection of minorities and women. Okay, that's not what happened. Okay, they got their protections. Okay, the Republicans were the ones responsible for those protections, being achieved. And then it just turned into, they kept asking for more. Okay, and they started being racist and sexist. So the Republicans stopped supporting that stuff. And the South used to be the place where all the crime took place. Okay, it was rough. So the Democrats, they controlled the South back then. Well, so yeah, the South used to be the region of crime and savagery. They tried to excuse slavery biblically, but it's obvious that they just had savage ideologies and selfish. It was big business in the South, the plantation owners and stuff. They were just selfish. So the crime rates, the gap in crime rates between the South and the North has narrowed. Okay, now the regions in the South that have the high crime rates are still Democrat, but the North, okay, they've been dominated by Democrats. Just that same savage ideology, trying to get profits and stuff, not caring about people. The crime in the cities and stuff in the North, the Democrats took over. Then other kinds of crime, I heard that the mob and the mafia and stuff, infiltrated the Democrats. It was said that the Democrats were easier to infiltrate. So when you talk about business related crime, stuff that wealthy people don't get caught for often, okay, that stuff's happening in the North. But yeah, when they talk about this switch happening, okay, there's no switch. All right, the Republicans have been consistently logical. It just the Democrats, the South stopped being all racist and sexist. It's actually the blue states, okay, that have higher rates of hate crimes nowadays. So most hate crimes nowadays, like when you talk about proportionally, okay, it comes from minorities. So it's actually the Democratic Party that is represented by racists nowadays. Well, still, but it's just it's minority racists instead of white racists. But yeah, right after the Civil Rights Act, the Democratic Party was pretty dominated. So it's likely that they just, the South gave up on the racism stuff. They became logical. The Democrats were weakened. They were scrambling for profits, scandalous opportunity. They found opportunity in, probably the mob and mafia and stuff, and the opportunity amongst the racist minorities and, these criminal cities and stuff. And, opportunities from sexist accusational women. So, Democrats may try to reference voting on homosexuality as evidence that there was some kind of switch in the morality of the Republican Party, but homosexuality has no merit. Okay, it's actually wrong. So the Republicans maintain their logical identity by voting against homosexuality. It's not the same as women's rights and the rights of minorities. Okay, it's actually something that's totally illogical and perverted and wrong. So if you try to use that as, some kind of evidence that the Republicans have become illogical and that there is some kind of switch in the ideology of being, more logically sound, that's just not good evidence. So when it comes to the modern LGBT whatever stuff and, the modern feminist stuff and minority advocacy and immigrant advocacy stuff, okay, it doesn't have logical merit. All right, these people, they already have their freedoms, the fundamental freedoms. They're just asking for special treatment. Okay, they're actually being racist and sexist. And obviously the perverts are just perverts. So yeah, obviously no fundamental switch between the parties. Okay, it's clear that the South stopped being racist. Okay, they conceded. Okay, they obviously conceded on that topic. I recognize the KKK is said to promote the Republicans, but that's because the Republicans are against this racism towards whites. So you see how that relationship would work. Okay, the North has more hate crimes nowadays than the South does. All right. It's just the Democratic Party maintained its prevalence in the criminal regions of the South, but it migrated to the criminal regions of the North. Okay? It adopted a new form of racism and sexism. So that's just a pretty obvious explanation of this supposed party switch. Okay? The Republicans no longer needed to be liberal. They actually had to start conserving. Okay, as a matter of logic on these ideas. So yeah, pretty obvious what happened there. If you want me to do more research on it, you can let me know, but I think it's pretty plain to see.